Amidst rising summer temperatures, I extend a heartfelt, cool welcome to all the participants joining us. On behalf of GST and IDT Committee of I, C. Radhika Kator, extend a refreshing welcome for today's webinar on GSTAT procedure and practical insights. We encourage all the participants to stay involved thoroughly. Drop us your queries in advance to make the most of this learning opportunity. To understand the procedural framework, practical challenges, and emerging nuances around GSTAT, we have amongst us the Abhay Desai sir, a nationwide well-recognized accomplished speaker. Without wasting any more time, before we delve into the speaker session, I request CA Umesh Sharma sir, Chairman GST and Indirect Taxes Committee, to present his welcoming remarks.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Radhika. And as you have pointed out, it's a hot summer. You are from Akola, which is the hottest city right now in Maharashtra by temperature. And we also have the hottest topic, that is GSTAT in GST. And we have the hottest speaker, Abhay Bhai, who is full in demand due to his expertise in litigation practice in GST. So I welcome you all for this webinar on the GSTAT practice. Friends, under GST committee, we are doing a lot of activity, and GST is the flavor of the season. There are the workshop plan across India. There are now outreach program also of the GSTAT. We already met the president of GSTAT, Mishra ji, and we, under guidance of our passionate chairman, RK sir, we are across India to meet the states and central departments, and we are training the officers. Further, we have book writing competition. I will request you all to join the book writing competition, which is open up to 30th of April. Go and visit GST and IDT committee website, and you can also be a writer or a reviewer for the book. So friends, I wish you all happy learning. All the best. Enrise, empower yourself in this GST tribunal practice area, which is a new area, and maximum chartered accountants should join this so that they can lead in GST practice in future. So over to you, Radhika. Thank you, tech team, and thank you all participants for joining.
Thank you, sir. It's an appreciating fact that in spite of his busy schedule, he found time and to share his welcoming remarks and the progress that he has been doing on all our behalf. Within a while, I would like to spare a few minutes to introduce our speaker, Advocate C. Abhay Desai, sir. He is an accomplished professional, an AIR ranker in C examinations. He is a lead advocate at Desai Legal Advocates and Solicitors firm, specializing in corporate law, rendering litigation advisory service. We are proud to have you, as he has appeared in more than 1,000 matters before Honorable High Court and tribunals. He has recently authored the book on GST Appellate Tribunal, Law and Practice, published by AIFTP along with Taxman, which was also released by Honorable Judges of Supreme Court. He has also made noteworthy representations before Honorable Finance Minister of India, as well as Honorable Deputy Finance Minister of India on various issues in indirect taxes. He has published more than 700 research articles in leading journals on taxation in India. We are fortunate to have you with us to share your perspectives. GSTAT. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, I'm grateful to ICAI, to the GST and Indirect Tax Committee of the Institute, Umesh Sharma Saab, RK Saab, Radhika Madam, to the fellow professionals who are today joining me in this webinar. Indeed, as the chairman rightly pointed out, that GSTAT would be a huge opportunity for chartered accountants. And it is high time that we start developing the core skill set which is required to capitalize on this opportunity. So my today's talk would be focused on the technical part of the subject as well as the experiential part, because I believe that sharing technical knowledge along with the experiential part of the area will certainly add a lot of value to today's discussion. So let me just try and if the tech support can allow me to share the screen so that I can put on my PPT. Yes. I hope the PPT would be visible. So friends, as the topic indicates, what we are going to discuss for next 1.5 hours or so would be the GST tribunal, the procedural part and the practical insight. Practical insight is where I believe that we will have a much stronger discussion, a much deeper discussion as to how one can gear herself or himself for capitalizing on this huge opportunity that is coming on our doors. Now, why I am telling you that it is an opportunity, simple facts will indicate that. So as you know, GST has been with us since 2017. It has been almost 9 years since the country has adopted GST. However, tribunal functioning is yet to start, except the principal bench. The litigation, the kind of litigation which has piled up is humongous. In fact, somewhere I read that more than 6 lakh appeals are what probably would get filed before the effective hearing starts. Coupled with that, we are seeing so many areas of disputes surrounding the provisions of the law, disputes surrounding the appreciation of facts. And as many of you are aware, that tribunal being the last fact-finding authority would be the only forum which will be able to deal with the factual aspects. Subsequent to the tribunal, if there are any adverse order, either if the taxpayer is aggrieved or the revenue is aggrieved, then the matter can be taken up before the Honorable High Court or the Supreme Court only on the substantial question of law. Therefore, the role of tribunal would be very, very important in resolving the factual disputes, legal disputes, and showing the way forward. Now, why this is an opportunity? A, the pendency is huge. B, the issues are not yet settled. What we find are the rulings from the high courts or some rulings from the Supreme Court are mainly on the larger issues of law, on the challenge to the vagaries of the provisions of the law, etc. But we are yet to see the settling of technical issues which are manifold in the context of GST. C, what we find is that the constitution of GST is quite different as opposed to what we had in the earlier regime. In earlier regime, we never had a law which was administered by center and state both. This is a law which is being administered by the center as well as state, and that is why we see even the composition of GSTAT is formulated based on on those principles. And the kind of benches that we are going to see, what we find that there will be more than 47 benches. There will be various sub benches under each of these benches, some comprising of single members, some comprising of division benches. We will also see occasions where the matters would get referred to the larger bench, to the third member bench, etc. So we will have so many varied views which will be coming across to us, which will be enough to create much litigation and much chaos down the line. We also believe that given the fact that the tribunal will be operating from several benches, and given the fact that in the rules we do not see how these benches will basically coordinate amongst themselves as regards the issues related to law. And therefore, we will find that it will not be surprising to see that we will have different judgments from different division benches, because as you are aware, a decision of a division bench of the tribunal will not completely bind the division bench of the same tribunal. But therefore, we will see that division benches across various states, across various jurisdictions, taking contrary views. We may also see that the matters which will require a constitution of a larger bench will also have its own challenges. We will deal with that as we go ahead in the presentation. So per se, this is enough to indicate that there will be a lot of conflicting views, a lot of decisions that would contradict each other, and therefore to that extent also the litigation would increase. Then we are also seeing the tendency of the revenue at the administration stage to basically try and create litigation. There are many reasons, compelling reasons of why this tendency exists. First and foremost, of course, the revenue targets. Second is, of course, their individual targets, etc. So in that background, what we are seeing at the ground level is that the litigation is only increasing as time progresses. And now what we are seeing, especially, is that in the earlier days of GST, the litigation was more on the basic computational differences between 2A, 3B. Then we had e-way bill with GSTR1. Then we had discrepancies in annual returns, etc., which were highlighted and which were ultimately taken into litigation. But now we are seeing that the revenue is also learning the law, appreciating the nuances of the law, and therefore now coming up with certain novel issues, and which are ultimately resulting in litigation. So we are seeing also that trend on the revenue side in terms of now raising issues which are not fall in the usual bucket of things. Therefore, to that extent also those issues will require a resolution, and tribunal will be one of the foremost forum for the purpose of resolving those disputes. So in this background, certainly the opportunity is huge, and therefore it is upon us now as professionals to really develop those skill set which will be required for the purpose of effectively representing the clients before this August body. So with that in mind, let me start the presentation. So presentation will divide it in three parts. So first, I'll briefly, maybe in 5-10 minutes, take you through the basic statutory framework, so all of us are on the same page as regards what are the basic provisions of the law related to filing of appeals before the tribunal, etc. Then we look at the issues that one may face while performing this task of drafting and filing the appeals, and then we go to the practical part, which is the third part and the most important part of today's discussion, where we can have a discussion on the manner in which you can approach the cases, how you can develop the arguments, how you can structure your statement of facts, how you can draft grounds of appeal. If you are on the other side and if you are filing a cross objection, then how you can go about doing that work. And I will also share some of my practical insights on how you can manage this work. Also, we will discuss in the practical part how you present yourself while appearing before this tribunal, because that is something which I believe all of us as professionals will also have to learn. So we'll discuss about how you should approach your case if your matter is called out. How do you address the bench? How do you take the bench to the conclusion which you believe will provide relief to the client? We also will discuss how do you deal with the questions which may come from the bench, how do you address those questions, etc. So that is all the practical part that we are going to discuss as a third aspect of today's talk. Now, as far as the statutory framework is concerned, Chapter 17 of the CGST Act contains the provisions related to tribunal. It starts from Section 109 up to 116. 109 deals with the constitution of the appellate tribunal and the benches thereof. Essentially, the law, which is the parliament and the states, have passed the GST law, whereby they have constituted a body which is known as a GST appellate tribunal, and that body will have the benches across India, And then certain powers of delegation have been given by the GST Act to the president of this tribunal to formulate certain procedures, to formulate certain rules. Government has also been delegated powers with the formulating certain rules. So exercising those powers, the government has formulated the CGST rules, which has contained certain procedural aspects related to the functioning of the tribunal, filing of appeals, etc. And GSTAT president, also exercising the powers, have issued certain notifications prescribing the rules and the manner in which the appeals are to be decided, filed, etc. before this body. Then Section 110 deals with the persons who are going to fill up this tribunal, the president and the members, what should be their qualifications, appointment, conditions of service, etc. 111 deals with the procedure. The Act briefly touches upon how the appeals are to be filed, and then it is by virtue of rules that the detailed procedures are stipulated. Then 112, which is the heart of the chapter, which deals with the creation of the right of appeal, who can file an appeal. It provides the time frame limitation within which the appeals and cross objections are to be filed either by the assessee or by the revenue. It also deals with certain conditions attached with the filing of the appeals as regards the payment of pre-deposits, etc. Section 113 deals with the power available with the tribunal for the purpose of passing the orders. It deals with as to manner in which the orders can be passed, the suggestive timeline within which the tribunal is required to pass the orders, etc. 114 deals with the financial and administrative powers of the president of the tribunal, who has been given by for delegated power certain powers to regulate the financial and the administrative side of the tribunal. 115 deals with the interest on the refund of the pre-deposit, which was paid at the time of appeal. And 116 deals with the authorized representative who are permitted to appear before this forum. So in a way, 116 permits chartered accountants as well as the advocates to appear before this forum. So this is in a summary the statutory scheme of the tribunal. These are the rules which are contained, which are formulated by the government. Rule 110 to 113A. 110 deals with the filing of appeals to the tribunal. It stipulates the form in which the appeals are to be filed. Then 111 deals with the procedure for the appeals which will be heard by the single member bench. 112 deals with the production of additional evidence. We will touch upon some of these aspects in detail in the subsequent part of the discussion. 113 deals with the order of the appellate authority or the appellate tribunal, the manner in which the orders are to be passed, how the summaries are to be, in what form the summary of the orders are to be issued, etc. And 113A deals with the withdrawal of the appeal before the appeal is heard or taken up for hearing. If the appellant wants to withdraw the appeal, then 113A deals with the procedure qua that withdrawal. So this is in a way the rules formulated by the government in exercise of the powers under the Act. Then we have also the rules formulated by the GSTAT itself in exercising the powers under the law. So 4 important notifications you can see on your screen. The first notification deals with the constitution of the principal and the state benches, the jurisdiction of these benches. Then the second notification, which is dated 24th April 2025, deals with the GST appellate procedure rules. These are the detailed rules which have been formulated as regards the procedures to be undertaken by the GSTAT. Then third notification deals with cases which are to be heard exclusively by the principal bench. So it has identified 6 subject matters where if any of that issue is contained in your matter, then that case, entire case, will be heard exclusively by the principal bench. And as many of you would be aware, that if you are aggrieved with the decision of principal bench, then the appeal on a substantial question of law will lie directly before the Honorable Supreme Court, as against cases which are heard by the state benches. In a situation where the cases are heard by the state benches, and if the aggrieved person wants to further file an appeal on the substantial question of law, then that appeal will lie before the jurisdictional high court and not directly to the Honorable Supreme Court. So this is second distinction, apart from the subject matter which can be dealt exclusively by the principal bench. And the fourth notification deals with the timeline for the purpose of filing the appeals. Essentially, it says that any orders which are communicated up to 31st March of this year, the appeals can be filed on or before 30th June of this year. So this is essentially four important notifications which have been issued qua the procedural part for the purpose of the forum, the bench where the appeals are to be filed, the rules in respect of the procedures to be followed at the tribunal, cases which are to be heard exclusively by the principal bench, and the timelines for the purpose of filing the appeals. Now, this is section 109, what we discussed earlier, which creates this body. Now, I will stop here and just briefly address how we came to this point in time. So, many of you would be aware that Income Tax Appellate Tribunal was the first tribunal which was ever constituted in our country. The whole idea of tribunalization came during 1960s when it was felt that the high courts were getting burdened with several matters, and the justice there would get delayed, and therefore a need was felt that we need a body which is independent, similar to the High Court, but at the same time is flexible enough in terms of procedure, and also at the same time is filled up with the members having a technical expertise over that subject, so that the cases can be disposed of faster, as opposed to the looking at the pendency that was already getting created at the level of High Court. So that is why the idea of tribunalization came. Initially, Income Tax Appellate Tribunal was the first tribunal which was constituted. It was constituted through the provisions of the Income Tax Act. Subsequently, it was felt that since this body has a stature equivalent to a High Court in terms of judicial independence, therefore, a need was felt that such bodies should have a constitutional backing, and therefore the constitution was amended, and Article 323 capital A and capital B were inserted in the constitution to give this body a constitutional standing. Initial days after the constitutional amendment, dispute arose as regards the nature of this body. Largely, the Supreme Court has taken a view that since this body was created to have a stature equivalent to that of a High Court, therefore the Supreme Court says that this body should be independent, should have no interference as far as possible from the executive. And therefore, to that extent, the Supreme Court has laid down several guidelines from time to time as regards the manner in which the members in this body should be selected, the manner in which the tenure of the members, the age criteria for the members, the financial benefits which would be statutorily granted to the members, and whether and who will have the authority to vary those aspects in certain situations, etc. So, in a nutshell, the whole idea of tribunalization was to eventually reduce the pendency at the High Courts and create an alternate body which is formulated under the law, which will have a procedure which will be less rigorous and which will comprise of members having the expertise in that area, so that it can serve the purpose of delivering justice without much delay. So that was the whole idea. But unfortunately, we see now in GST, 9 years have gone, and now we are probably going to see the tribunal functioning soon, effectively. So this indicates that the whole idea of tribunal being a body which can result in a speedier justice to some extent has already been to an extent given a go by, in the sense that it has taken 9 years for us to come to this stage. However, we hope that going down the line, probably the members who are going to grace this institution would take up the task of ensuring that the justice, what all the taxpayers are seeking, is not now further delayed. So that is the hope. We will also see some aspects of this little later when we touch upon the issues in regards to the constitutionality of this forum, etc. But at this point in time, I will stop and I will now take you again to the statutory provisions, whereby under Section 109, this body is created, which we call it as a Goods and Service Tax Appellate Tribunal. This body is created for hearing appeals against the orders which are passed by either the first appellate authority or the revisional authority, or for matters which requires adjudication under Section 171(2), that is anti-profiteering matters. So three kinds of orders, three kinds of matters are what will be agitated before this forum, GSTAT. Appeals against the orders passed by the first appellate authority, appeals against the revisional orders, and third, adjudication of cases wherein there is a reference to the anti-profiteering provisions, and accordingly the investigation has been undertaken, and the findings are required to be adjudicated as regards whether the commensurate benefit in terms of Section 171(2) has been passed to the buyers or not. So these are the three orders, three matters where the GSTAT will have a jurisdiction to decide the cases. Appellate authority, we already seen that is the first appellate authority, and revisional authority under Section 108 of the CGSTI. There is a power vested with the revisional authority. It is in the nature of a supervisory power, where the revisional authority, if comes to the opinion that the order passed by the subordinate authority is prejudicial to the revenue's interest, in that situation, subject to certain exceptions, the revisional authority can take those orders under revision, pass a revision order, and a challenge to that order will lie directly before the GSTAT. The challenge to that order will not be before the Commissioner Appeals, which is the first appellate authority. This is also because the revisional power is bestowed to the commissioner, and therefore obviously the rank of the commissioner is higher in rank than the first appellate authority, which are either the joint commissioner appeals or additional commissioner appeals in the or commissioner appeals in the context of GST. And therefore, the law has been structured in a way to say that against the revisional order, which will be passed at times with the officer of the same rank as the officer who is Commissioner Appeals, and therefore to avoid that conflict of a decision of the officer of the same rank being overturned by the another officer of the same rank, a provision has been structured in a way to say that the orders of revisional authority can directly be challenged before the GSTAT, which is the GST tribunal. So these are the orders which will be taken up before GSTAT. The composition of the bench, each bench will have 4 members. Principal bench will have president, judicial member, and 2 technical members, one from center and another from state. State benches also will have 4 members, 2 judicial and 2 technical, one from center and state. Now, what we understand today is that each of these benches will have multiple division benches, single member bench, depending on the quantum of matters which will get filed and how administratively the benches are structured in times to come. But what we feel that to start with, we will obviously have a division bench. We will have 1 judicial member and 1 technical member. The technical member could be from center and state. And at the same time, we will also have certain single member benches, which will be dealing with cases where the revenue involved is not more than 50 lakhs, cases which does not involve any question of law. So those are the cases where the matters can be dealt by the single bench. Of course, there are certain exceptions to this also, that even if the case is not above 50 lakhs, not involving any question of law, but if for the same taxpayer, if already on that same matter for a preceding period, if matter is already pending before the division bench, then the matter, even if the stake involved is not more than 50 lakhs, would still be taken up by the division bench only and not by the single bench. And of course, president is also given the powers to, from time to time, to prescribe as to what are the kind of matters which will be taken up by the single bench vis-a-vis division bench. So that is how the functioning on the administrative side will happen once this body starts effectively calling for the hearing. So as far as the jurisdictions are concerned, this is an illustrative chart I have prepared. So as you can see, each state has multiple benches. So for example, when we talk about Gujarat as an example, it has Ahmedabad, which would be the state bench. Surat again is considered as a state bench, and Rajkot will be considered as a circuit bench. As you can see in the third column, the territorial jurisdiction has been given. So wherever the first appellate authority, if let us say you are challenging the order of the first appellate authority, if the first appellate authority is having a territorial jurisdiction over what is stated in the third column, then the appeal against those orders will lie before the bench, which is stated in the second column. So if let us say if the first appellate authority passes an order having a jurisdiction over Ahmedabad, in that situation, the Ahmedabad bench will then be dealing with the appeal which would be filed against that order of the first appellate authority. Same principle will apply even for the revisional cases, where if the revisional authority has a territorial jurisdiction over Ahmedabad and passes an adverse order, and if the taxpayer is aggrieved and wants to challenge that order before the tribunal, then the appeal would get listed before the Ahmedabad bench and not before the Surat bench or the Rajkot circuit bench. Circuit bench and state bench, the difference would be that the state benches would be permanent bench. A circuit bench is something where the members would from time to time travel to that location and hold the hearing. So it will not be a regular bench as opposed to Ahmedabad and Surat as an illustrative scenario. So in a circuit bench, on the administrative side, we will see that the matters will be taken up only on few days in the month, when the members would travel from the regular benches to the circuit benches, and there the division and the single member bench would get constituted, and accordingly the matters would be taken up. Who can file an appeal? So before I take you through this, first let me just briefly touch upon the aspect of the right of appeal. So a right of appeal is a statutory right. It is not a constitutional right. For example, if you see on your screen, section 112 subsection 1 creates that right by way of a statute, where the statute gives the right to the person who is aggrieved by the orders of the first appellate authority to challenge those orders before the GST tribunal. So it is a statutory right, and being a statutory right, it will come with the conditions. Courts have held that since it is in the nature of a statutory right, coupled with conditions, and therefore the conditions are required to be satisfied for the purpose of exercising the rights. However, courts have also held that a procedural infirmity or a procedural violation cannot come in the way and defeat the substantive right of an appeal. So in cases where the appeals are filed with certain defects, the appeals cannot be merely rejected because the same has been filed with defects. The normal course of proceeding would be for the registry to issue a defect notice, permitting certain time frame to the appellant to rectify those defects, clarify on those defects, and accordingly decide the fate of those appeals. A procedural infirmity, procedural lapse cannot come in the way of defeating the substantive right. So there also we have fairly settled law on those two propositions. Third, being a statutory right, it has to be exercised within the period prescribed in the law. So as you can see on your screen, the regular period for the purpose of filing an appeal before this tribunal is 3 months from the date of the communication of the order sought to be appealed against. So this time frame is very important. So an appeal has to be filed within this time frame of 3 months. Of course, the law provides for the further period of 3 months. That is the maximum period for which the delay can be condoned by the tribunal, subject to the sufficient cause. So in a situation where you missed filing of the appeal, let us say by 30th June, then you will have to exercise and invoke the condonation powers of the tribunal. That of course is again can be invoked only if you file belated appeal within this condonable further period of 3 months. And if you file the belated appeal within this further period of 3 months, you will have to invoke the powers of the tribunal to condone the delay, and therefore you will have to satisfy the tribunal as regards the sufficient cause, as regards the reasons which prevented the appellant from filing the appeal within the normal period of limitation. So this is again a limitation flowing from the statute itself in terms of a time period within which the appeals are required to be filed. This is what we discussed. 112 subsection 6 permits further period of 3 months for the purpose of controlling the delay. Now, as opposed to this, in the earlier regime, many would be aware that Central Excise Tribunal had unlimited powers to condone the delay. There was no time limit within which those powers were to be exercised. But now in GST, even the tribunal is fettered with only an additional period of 3 months within which they have a power to condone the delay. Beyond 3 months, even the parliament has not given the power to the tribunal to condone the delay. Similarly, for cross objection, normal limitation is 45 days. Additional period of 45 days is granted for the purpose of delayed filing of the cross objections. Pre-deposit, Section 112, subsection 8 says that no appeal shall be filed unless the appellant has paid A, the entire amount of undisputed tax, interest, fee, penalty, and 10% of the disputed tax. So this is how the provisions is structured. It must be noted that this amount which is required to be paid under subsection 8 is in addition to what was the amount which was already paid under subsection 6 of section 107. So for the purpose of filing the first appeal, you might have paid 10% of the disputed tax at that point in time as a deposit under 107 subsection 6. Now, if you are aggrieved by the order of the first appellate authority, now whatever remaining amount of tax is there which is in dispute, you will have to pay 10% of the remaining amount of tax in dispute. And this is over and above what you had already paid at the first appellate stage. And it is upon this payment that the law provides that the appeal shall be filed. In a situation where the order only demands penalty, so in cases of orders which are issued under section 122, read with section 127, orders issued imposing penalties, only penalties, in those cases, the law provides, the proviso provides that in such situation, the appeal shall require a payment of deposit equal to the sum of 10% of the said penalty. Now, it is very important to here note that section 112, subsection 8, especially the proviso to this provision came to be inserted with effect from 1st October 2025, which was done by virtue of Finance Act of 2025. So question that arises is what we are going to deal just slightly at a later point in time is that what happens to the notices which were issued demanding penalty prior to the date of insertion of this proviso. There, according to me, we have a settled law where the Supreme Court has said that the appeal provisions at that point in time, when the right to file an appeal arose, those provisions will become applicable. So in a situation where the dispute, once the dispute is occasioned, this is where the right gets created in statute to challenge any of the orders which are passed at a later point in time before the statutory authorities, be it the first appellate authority or the tribunal in this case. Therefore, when the list arose prior to 1st October 25, prior to the insertion of this proviso, one can take a view that in such situation, there is no requirement to pay any deposit of 10% of the penalty amount, because at that point in time, when the dispute arose, there was no proviso which indicated that in a situation where the order only demands penalty, then in such situation, 10% of that amount will have to be paid as a deposit for the purpose of exercising this right of appeal. But of course, when the list arises after 1st October 25, that is once this proviso has been made applicable, then it would not be possible to take this stand that there is no requirement of paying this deposit. So that is how I would look at this situation. There is a upper capping of 20 crores under CGST and 20 crores under SGST, so total 40 crores. So a pre-deposit amount cannot exceed this amount in a situation where high stake disputes are there, where the 10% of the disputed amount is above 40 crores, then the law provides that the maximum which is required to be paid as a deposit would be 40 crores. Then we have this circular which was issued in 2024 saying that since the functioning of the tribunal or the portal itself was not operationalized, the circular took the view that in a situation where if an aggrieved person is planning to file an appeal against that order, the circular suggested that you make the pre-deposit, so that will result into a stay against the recovery. And as and when the tribunal, the portal starts functioning and the filing window opens, the aggrieved person can file the appeal. So essentially, an administrative circular was issued. However, the principle in the law is this, that the requirement of pre-deposit arises at the time of filing, and subsequently subsection 9 of section 112 says that once the pre-deposit is paid, then there will be a deemed stay. And because of the deemed stay, there will be no further recovery action that can be taken by the revenue authorities till your appeal is not disposed of by the GST tribunal. So that is how the provisions are structured. So these are the cases where the matters will be heard exclusively by the principal bench. So cases involving an issue related to place of supply, anti-profiteering matters, cases where the president passes a direction or an order saying that since these are the cases which are pending before 2 or more state benches and having an identical question of law, the president through that order will notify that those cases will be heard exclusively by the principal bench. Cases which involves disputes related to online database access and information retrieval services, where the payments are made to a person who is located in a non-taxable territory outside India. Cases related to online gaming. Now, of course, the law has ultimately restricted this activity. However, as in the prior years when the online gaming was in vogue, if the cases involve disputes related to applicability of GST on this online gaming, those cases will also be heard exclusively by the principal bench. And lastly, cases which involves issues related to ISD, the input service distributor. So any matters where the question involves relating to the credits which are distributed by the ISDs, and basis that some demands are raised, then those matters also will have to be heard exclusively by the principal bench. So these are the subject matters where exclusive jurisdiction has been vested. And as we discussed earlier, the matters which are vested with the principal bench, as far as exclusive jurisdictions are concerned, the appeal against those matters will lie directly to before the Honorable Supreme Court, as far as this 5 category of matters are concerned. Now, as far as procedures are concerned, rules 110(1) deals with the form in which the appeals are to be filed. APL 05 is the form. Along with that, we have to attach relevant documents. Please understand that as on date, the only mechanism which has been prescribed under the law is electronic filing. So all appeals before GST Appellate Tribunal will have to be filed only electronically. There is no physical filing which is permitted as on date for the purpose of this matter. Cross objections again will be filed in electronically. The form is APL 06. As far as the filing fees are concerned, the rules provides that for every 1 lakh rupee of demand of tax or input tax credit, the amount of fee would be 1,000 rupees. Of course, this would be into 2 because we have state GST and center GST. Both the demands are raised, or if it is IGST, it is anyway multiplied by 2. So it would be effectively 2,000 rupees for every 1 lakh of demand. Minimum fee is 5,000, so it would be 10,000, and maximum fee is 50,000. Cases which does not involve any demand of tax, interest, fee, etc., the fee would be 5,000. Any interlocutory application that you file before the tribunal, the fee would be 5,000. Now, as you can see, I will just pause here to indicate 2 aspects before I take you further as far as these procedures are concerned. Let me tell you, friends, the procedure for filing the appeal is very, very cumbersome. In fact, if some of you have tried filing the appeal, will agree that it takes humongous efforts, data compilation, etc., for the purpose of filing these forms. The reason is very simple. If you have a look at the forms, you will know that it captures a lot of the case details in a lot granular format, which requires you that for entire demand, you need to break the demand issue-wise. Against each issue, you have to further break the demand into sub-issues, identify the relevant law which is alleged to have been violated against those sub-issues, quantify the demand arising out of those sub-issues, and that is how the entire summary has to be prepared. Along with that, you have to also give a brief history of the case, a chronological history of the case, starting with, let us say, if search was conducted, which has resulted into the present appeal. Then you have to start with search. You have to start with the Panchnama, the Caesar memo, the show cause notice, the order, the first appeal order, and that is how chronologically you have to come to the present point in time where you are now filing the appeal before the GST tribunal. So that entire case history also has to be tabulated in the format in which it is given in these forms, and without that, the appeals cannot be filed. So the point I'm making is that as against the original idea of making this body less rigorous in terms of formalities, etc., we are now in the facing situations where the filing itself is made so rigorous that in fact filing itself is a challenge. In fact, recognizing this, even the president of the GSTAT issued last month an order directing the registry to take a lenient view on the examination of the appeals which are filed for the purpose of for 6 months as an initial phase of this tribunal. But I would say that again, it's a very vague order. Probably the registry will not have any idea as to how the leniency is to be indicated, in which aspects of the appeal the leniency is to be shown or condoned, etc. So again, this will result into a lot of unwarranted defect memos getting issued at a later point in time, and professionals, the authorized representatives being asked to clarify on all those defects, rectify those defects, and then the appeals would get listed for the hearing. So that will unnecessarily complicate the things. But that is how it is. In fact, a lot of representations have already gone to make this process more simpler. At times, we are also facing situations where the demands are wrongly indicated in the summary orders, in the summary of the first appeal orders. The portal auto-populates those information. As an example, let us say there is a case where the demand is of 2 crores. Someone during investigation has paid already 50 lakhs under protest. Today, the person is aggrieved by the entire demand of 2 crores. The person wants to file appeal before the tribunal. Now, in this situation, if let us say in DRC 07, that is the summary order, if the demand itself is of 1.5 crore, if that is what has been issued to that particular taxpayer, then what happens is that the system calculates 10% of that as a pre-deposit amount. But that is a wrong calculation, because here the taxpayer is aggrieved with the entire demand of 2 crores. And therefore, the 50 lakhs, what he has paid during investigation, is all under protest. And therefore, that amount will have to be counted towards the satisfaction of requirement of a deposit under section 112, subsection 8. But in absence of such column available in DRC 07 or APL 04, which is a summary of the first appeal order, unfortunately, when such person goes on the tribunal portal to file the appeal, then they are facing these situations where they are not able to amend these columns. They are not able to show that in such situation he is agreed with the demand of 2 crores and he has already paid 50 lakhs, which is sufficient to take care of the requirement of 112 subsection 8, and therefore effectively he does not have to pay any deposit. But in absence of that facility available on the portal today, those appellants are stuck as regards how they should go about filing the appeals. And since manual filing is also not permitted, there is no way in which these taxpayers are able to file their appeals. So a lot of suggestions have already gone to the GSTAT, to the government. Hopefully, by the time well before the limitation ends for the purpose of legacy cases, we hope that some solutions are given. If you look at the first appellate authority appeal process, it is very simple. In fact, that is even many associations have urged that similar to the first appeal process, a similar simpler process should be devised for the purpose of tribunal. Additional data can also be compiled at a later point in time, etc. But at the start itself, if such a cumbersome process or procedure is thrusted on the taxpayers, then especially the small taxpayers who may not have those kinds of resources, who may not have those kinds of means, would ultimately not able to access this forum for the purpose of redressing their grievances. So this is where the matters are stuck. I would strongly advise that if you are also facing such technical challenges, you kindly raise the concern, kindly send an email to the GSTAT authority, kindly also raise the grievance with the GST authority, so that tomorrow you have an evidence to indicate that you tried filing the appeal, but because of this ABC reasons, along with the screenshots, you are not able to file the appeal, and therefore tomorrow you do not face the problem of being ousted from exercising the right of appeal on the ground of delay. So this is something where hopefully we feel that some resolution is required. But till that time, this is the evidence that at least you should have, and steps that you should take so that your right to appeal is preserved and does not stand defeated on such procedural irregularities or on such technical grounds which are beyond your control, beyond your reach. So this is something that I feel everyone must appreciate and must undertake. As far as procedures are concerned, again, the procedure is very cumbersome. If you look at the GSTAT rules, it basically indicates how the cause title are required to be drafted, how the presentations are to be done, how the entire appeal will have to be divided into paragraphs. Each would be numbered consecutively. Then a separate fact has to be very neatly and separately stated. Separate point has to be stated in a separate paragraph. What would be the spacing between the lines? You have to use A4 size paper. All the pages should be duly paginated. They should be kept in separate folders. Each form will have to be verified, either statement of facts, rounds of appeals, prayers, everything will have to be verified. Orders, if they are available from the portal, then those itself will suffice. Otherwise, a certified copy of the orders, if let us say the order is not uploaded on the portal, the original order is not uploaded on the portal, and now you are filing an appeal. So of course you will have to attach the original order also. But in absence of it being uploaded on the portal, you will have to ask for a certified copy. And it is that certified copy, the scan of that copy, which will have to be uploaded on the portal for the purpose of filing the appeal. Then it also provides for translated copies. So in situations where state officers have passed the orders notices in vernacular language, then in such situation, all those documents will have to be translated into English language. So in an example where, let us say, your matter was with the state authority, it is possible that the show cause notice will be in vernacular language. The order in original could be in vernacular language. The appeal order, the first appeal order, could be in vernacular language. So you'll have to get all these documents translated into English language, and then you will have to be, and then a translated copy, certified copy, will have to be uploaded along with the appeal. Now, this is a cumbersome task for two reasons. A, these days, a lot of us are using AI. Now, when you use AI for the purpose of translation, I have personally examined cases where something which was written in a vernacular language, either it could be, let us say, in Marathi, Hindi, Gujarati, etc. But when you look at the translated form of that language, the entire meaning changes. What was originally meant by the officer for the purpose of disputing the demand, and that reasoning could be entirely incorrect. And therefore, you would have focused on that reasoning before the first appellate authority to say that that order is illegal. But now when you give a translated copy, the meaning itself changes. At times I have seen the words are not the way and the sense in which it was indicated in the actual notice or the actual order, etc. So there you will have to take extra care to ensure that this translation does not result into a loss of the meaning of those words which were used in the vernacular language. Otherwise, you will be facing issues where the entire sense of dispute will change. The entire tenor of dispute will change. You might be disputing on certain proposition of law, and on reading of the translated copy, the members of the tribunal may not be able to appreciate and correlate your arguments with the text of the impugned notices or the orders, and therefore you have to take extra care to ensure that the translated copies maintain the same text, same meaning, same context as the original source. Second, translated copy will have to be either agreed by both the parties, then there will be no certification required, or it would have to be certified. Now, as far as agreement with both the parties are concerned, how you will find that agreement? Because today, if you are filing an appeal, today you go to that officer and say that, look, sir, this is my translated copy in English language. Kindly agree to this translated copy, and then I will upload it, and then I will meet this requirement of the rules. It is impossible. So therefore, the only recourse left is to have a certified copy. So therefore, you will also have to again get those translated copies certified, and that is again going to be a second challenge as far as this compliance is concerned. So essentially, the filing procedure is cumbersome, is rigorous, requires you to prepare much well in advance. So filing before the tribunal will not be in a manner where, let us say, the due date is tomorrow. You cannot take up the task today and think that it will be done by end of day or tomorrow. You will have to start your preparation days in advance, because you will come across situations which will require meeting with all these technical rules that you can see on your screen. And therefore, you will have to give enough time to your office. Probably you will require a certain person in your office who is exclusively conversant with all these requirements, procedural requirements, so that your appeals are filed in a correct manner. Because even if you file an appeal today, it goes on the portal, provisional acknowledgement is issued. But once those appeals will be scrutinized, and if it is found that the rules are not complied with, then probably you will end up receiving the defect memos. You will have to then end up rectifying those defects, and then the appeals would be taken up for hearing. So that would again result into unnecessary lot of wastage of time, efforts, energy, etc. So to avoid that, please ensure that all these procedural rigors are followed. As far as the additional evidence is concerned, this is also very important, because 112 rule mandates that the tribunal can look at the additional evidence, but the parties who is adducing that additional evidence cannot adduce it just as a matter of right. The party will have to demonstrate the reasons as to why they could not adduce this evidence at an earlier stage in the proceedings. If that is the case, or parties will have to demonstrate that they were prevented for sufficient cause for not being able to adduce those evidences at the lower stages, or the parties will have to demonstrate that in the interest of justice, it is required that this additional evidence be taken on record. So you will have to put your case in any of these three buckets, and therefore justify why the additional evidence should be admitted and should be considered for the purpose of adjudicating the appeal. Now, friends, here also kindly note one aspect, that let us take a simple case where, let us say, as you are aware that in many cases the revenue says that the transactions with your suppliers are not genuine, and therefore the claim of input tax credit is disputed under section 16(2). They might have invoked clause B or clause C. Now, if situation where they have invoked clause B, where they are saying that they are alleging that you have not received the underlying goods or services. Now, you are, as you are aware, the onus is on the claimant. Now, under section 155, now to discharge that onus, you will have to produce certain evidences. You will have to produce the LR copy, the lorry receipt copy, the the transport documents, whatever you are which are available with the gate entry receipts, the inventory records where you demonstrate that you have received the inventories, the weighbridge receipts to indicate that you have actually received the quantity which is there in the invoice, etc. Now, all those evidences will demonstrate the genuineness and will also release you from the burden which is there under Section 155. Then the owners will go on the revenue to prove that why those evidences which you have adduced are not acceptable and why still the claim of credit is not eligible under the law. But before this adjudication can take place, these evidences have to be there on record. Now, let us say you have missed putting those entire evidences on record at the adjudication stage or the first appeal stage. At the tribunal stage, you will have to put this along with this reasoning to say that why you were either restricted or you could not have, or in the interest of justice, it is required that the tribunal looks at this evidence before pronouncing the judgment. Now, why this additional evidence should also go as part of the initial appeal paper book? It is for the reason that you will save a lot of time and cost. Why I am saying this? Because in the GST tribunal, the functioning would be like this, that once your appeal is filed, any additional document that you want to produce will have to be done through an interlocutory application. So there is a special IA interlocutory application which will have to be preferred. In that interlocutory application, again, you will attach those evidences which were missed in the while filing the appeal and justify why those additional evidences should be taken on record. And each interlocutory application will entail a fee of 5,000 rupees. So you can imagine that if, let us say, while at the time of filing the appeal, if you miss attaching certain documents, and then at that stage of and at a later point in time, if you want to attach those documents, then that will entail not only a separate filing, a separate procedure, but even a separate fee, statutory fee, which will have to be paid for the purpose of filing that application. So that is why kindly take enough care to ensure that whatever records that you want to put forward to serve your case will have to be filed at the time of initial filing itself, so as to avoid this entire process of filing interlocutory applications, etc. So this is in the context of Rule 112. So these are the forms, illustrative list of forms which have been prescribed as regards the manner in which the proceedings will have to be undertaken before the GSTAT. Now, as far as issues are concerned, let me just quickly for 5-10 minutes deal with this, and then we go to the third limb of my today's discussion as regards the practical insights. Now, before dealing with practical insights, because these are the aspects which I believe, again, some aspects are technical, legal, some aspects are procedural, but a fair understanding is required for the purpose of effectively handling the matters which you will be dealing with before this forum. So, constitutional challenge, we have already touched upon briefly. Supreme Court, time and again in the case of Madras Revenue Bar Association, has said that the constitution of tribunal, including the GST tribunal, is illegal. Supreme Court has highlighted various reasons for that. One of the reasons Supreme Court has highlighted is this, that the search and selection committee will recommend 2 names to the government and government will pick one. The Supreme Court says this itself imparts the independence of the tribunal, because when 2 names are forwarded and 1 name is sought to be selected, the integrity and the independence becomes questionable. Supreme Court also says that the tenure which is given to the members is so short, because each member will get only one tenure of 4 years, an additional tenure of 2 years. Beyond that, there is no additional tenure which is made available to the members. So looking at this, the maximum tenure that each of the member will have before this tribunal is 6 years. So considering that, Supreme Court says that this again violates the value of independence, because and also violates the principle of in the sense that with a shorter tenure, you cannot expect members to be encouraged to become part of this tribunal, and therefore to that extent also defeats the whole purpose of this being a special body created for the speedier disposal of cases, because speedier disposal of cases requires members who are earnest, who are keen, and who are willing to put in that kind of work which is required for the purpose of achieving the objective. But with such shorter tenures, the incentive for the members to join this tribunal to a large extent will be affected. So this is again Supreme Court highlights in that case to say that this again violates the constitutional scheme of this tribunal being an independent body and preserving the independence. So these are the some factors. However, let us see in times to come whether GST Council will follow and appreciate the stand of the Supreme Court. Till date, we have seen that despite Supreme Court saying this time and again, the GST Council has not been able to effectively deal with all the aspects which are indicated by the Honorable Supreme Court, and has corrected only some of those aspects which are indicated by the Honorable Supreme Court. But certain aspects like tenure, the search and selection committee recommending 2 names instead of only 1 name, etc. So these are the challenges which still remain. As far as writ and appellate remedies are concerned, as we discussed earlier, appeal right is a statutory right. So it comes with conditions. And it's a right which is fettered by statute. A writ remedy is under Article 226 as far as high courts are concerned, Article 32 as far as Supreme Court is concerned. So these are wider powers available to a writ court, but writ court will exercise those powers only in certain situations. They will not, it's a discretionary power, not an inherent right of the assessee. So therefore, in cases where fundamental justice is violated, in cases where there is a challenge to the vires of the Act, tribunal being a body constituted by the Act cannot declare the provisions of the Act as invalid. So for example, 16(2)(c) it's a condition in law which says that unless the supplier has not actually paid the tax, the credit would not be available to the buyer, to the recipient. Now, tribunal cannot hold this to be ultra vires to Article 14 or Article 265, etc. It is only a writ court who will be able to hold this. So those are the cases where tribunal would not be able to declare the provisions of the law as ultra vires. So again, these are the cases where the writ remedies are available. Then there are cases where the proceedings are without jurisdiction. So in a situation where let us say the officer did not have the jurisdiction or of invoking Section 74, but without making any averment or without bringing any evidence on record to say that how that case involves fraud, suppression, etc., merely because the timeline to issue the order under Section 73 had lapsed. And therefore, the officer resorts to Section 74 for the purpose of initiating the proceedings. That initiation itself, if it is without jurisdiction, then the writ court can look at that aspect, because once that goes, the entire case of the revenue falls. So then there is no reason of looking at other aspects related to the merits of the case. So this is again a bucket where if you are aggrieved with the exercise of jurisdiction, assumption of jurisdiction, writ court would be able to consider that issue and decide that matter. So this is the difference between writ remedy, appellate remedy. So in each of the matters, you will have to see if writ remedies are available and if it is advisable, because mere availability of writ remedy may not result into going before the high courts. Many times we have seen merely because remedy is available and matters are taken up to the courts, the expected outcome does not happen. So and it, at times it may also further damage the case. So you have to be wise enough to consider looking at the interest of the client as to which of the remedies would be more beneficial in a situation where both are available. Of course, when only appellate remedy is available, that is the remedy that you will have to exercise. Appealable order, as far as this topic is concerned, it is not much an issue, because first appeal orders and revisional orders are the 2 kinds of orders which are appealable orders as far as GST tribunal is concerned. Departmental appeal, since revenue also has a power to appeal against the orders of the first appellate authority, or the revisional authority. So department also will be able to file an appeal if they are aggrieved. Of course, as far as revisional powers are concerned, since we already discussed, those powers are exercised only if those are prejudicial to the interest of revenue. So their revenue will not be aggrieved. It will be only the assessee, the taxpayer, who will be aggrieved by the revisional orders. But as far as the first appeal orders are concerned, it is quite possible that in cases where the first appeal has granted relief to the taxpayer, the revenue might be aggrieved, and therefore the commissioner will exercise the review jurisdiction. They will review the first appeal order, pass an order in review, and accordingly direct the subordinate officer to file an appeal. And accordingly, the revenues application will also be treated as an appeal, and the GST tribunal will be then deciding that appeal. So that is how the right is also created by law in favor of revenue for the purpose of challenging the part of the orders of the appellate authority which are against the revenue. Of course, this also has to be exercised within a period of 6 months, as against the ordinary period of 3 months available to the taxpayer. The law has granted a more luxury to the revenue in terms of giving an extended period of 6 months. They also enjoy an additional period of 3 months, the condonable period. So revenue has 6 plus 3, 9, whereas the assessee, the taxpayer, has 3 plus 3 normal period and 3 additional condonable period. The departmental revenues appeal, the date of communication would be the date of signing of the first appeal order. So there we have Supreme Court judgment in the case of Rubber, where Supreme Court has said that in a case of revenues appeal, it will be the date of signing of the first appeal order. That is where the revenue can be said to have been aware of that order, and therefore the time period of 6 months would start from that date. So this is again something which you have to keep in mind while challenging the revenues appeal. Limitation and condonation we already discussed. As far as condonation is concerned, after the decision of Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Singh Enterprises, now the law which is settled is that in a situation where the Parliament specifically formulates a law prescribing a period of limitation within which the right of appeal has to be exercised, Parliament also consciously grants a further period within which the delay can be condoned by that authority. Supreme Court says that in such situation, the provisions of the Limitation Act, which provide for unlimited time for condonation of delay, would not be applicable to such special statute. And since special statute has prescribed a certain time limit, a court will not be able to condone the delay. So in a situation where there is an appeal filed even beyond the condonable period, the Honorable High Court or the Supreme Court will not be in a position to condone those delay. You will have to probably exercise the writ remedy in terms of bringing out something what we already discussed related to the violation of principles of natural justice, violations to the act, jurisdiction issue, etc. And then you can hope that your petition might be entertained on those grounds and not on the ground of condonation of delay. Pre-deposits, we have briefly explained the procedure, the manner in which the pre-deposits are, and the quantum of the pre-deposit. Now, many question arises here. Can pre-deposit be paid through credit ledger? Now the answer is yes. Earlier, the revenue used to object. Now, already it is now settled. Supreme Court has held that, upheld the order of the Gujarat High Court, wherein the High Court had held that a pre-deposit can be paid even by using the balance available in the credit ledger in absence of any such restriction in law. So, to my mind, 112(8) does not say that pre-deposit has to be paid compulsorily from cash ledger, and therefore, to my mind, credit ledger is also available for the purpose of payment of the pre-deposits. As far as headwise balances are concerned, again, to my mind, Section 112, subsection 8 does not provide that pre-deposits have to be paid headwise. So if there is a demand of 2 crores, let us say 1 crore CGST, 1 crore SGST, and you have a balance available in the electronic credit ledger of, let us say, IGST or SGST, to my mind, as long as you are able to satisfy that 10% of that is available under any of the heads, and you debit those heads for the purpose of payment of the pre-deposit, it should result into a compliance with that requirement. The registry should not insist for headwise balances or headwise payments in absence of any such stipulation in law. Wherever the law wanted headwise apportionment, the law has consciously made the provision. For example, as far as Section 49 is concerned, and specifically an output tax is to be paid against and how the credits available in all the three heads, IGST, CGST, SGST, is to be utilized. The law has consciously provided for the provisions as to how that utilization and payment will happen. The same law in 112(8) does not provide for such head-to-head manner or utilization of the credit balances. Therefore, to my mind, consciously, the Parliament has not provided any restriction, and therefore, to that extent, the balance available under any of the heads can be utilized for the purpose of paying this pre-deposit. Question also arises that whether one can file an appeal without paying such pre-deposit. As we discussed earlier, the requirement of the law under 112(8) indicates that no appeal shall be filed unless so and so is paid. But if you see the law, then the requirement of pre-deposit arises under subsection 8 for the purpose of securing a deemed stay under subsection 9, because subsection 9 connects with subsection 8 and says that moment that amount is paid, there shall be a deemed stay, and therefore the recovery action the revenue will be restrained from taking the recovery action. As opposed to this, the section 112 subsection 1, which provides the timeline within which the appeals are to be filed, it does not say that those appeals can be filed only after the payment of the pre-deposit. And therefore, in cases where, let us say, the taxpayer does not have the money to pay the pre-deposits, there, if the taxpayer waits for arranging that money, and by the time the 6 months period, the normal 3 months and additional 3 months are over, then the taxpayer will become remediless. That cannot be the fair or a rational view in such cases. So in such cases, to my mind, it is permissible for the taxpayer to file an appeal without payment of pre-deposit. It will be a defective appeal, certainly, because that requirement of subsection 8 has not been complied with. Therefore, the registry will have to issue a defect notice and permitting the time for the taxpayer to cure that defect. It cannot be said that entire appeal itself will be considered as not to have been filed. In absence of any such provision in subsection 1 of section 112, to my mind, it cannot be said that the entire appeal is liable for dismissal without providing an opportunity to the appellant to rectify the defects and to pay the balance pre-deposit. So that would be, and on those lines, we have judgments in the earlier regime. To my mind, the underlying basis of those judgments would still survive, and therefore, to my mind, it is possible for the purpose of in situations where the taxpayer does not have the means to pay the pre-deposit, to file an appeal so as to avoid the situation of appeal getting time barred, and at the same time preserving the right to pay the pre-deposit and get those appeals then heard at a later point in time. Additional legal grounds, it can be taken at any stage. There is no bar. Additional evidence, as we discussed, you will have to comply with the requirements of Rule 112 and demonstrate that you have a reason for submitting and adducing that additional evidence, basis which the evidence will be admitted. Cross appeal and cross objection, what is the difference? Cross appeals are where, let us say, against the first appeal order, certain demands have been set aside, certain demands have been confirmed. So you are aggrieved against the demands which have been confirmed. Revenue is aggrieved against the demands which have been set aside. So in both these situations, you will also be filing an appeal, and if revenue also files an appeal against the demands which have been set aside, then this is a case of cross appeals. Cross objection is different. Cross objection is, let us say, you have succeeded in the first appeal, but you have succeeded on technical ground. Now revenue files an appeal before the GSTAT. In such situation, you are not aggrieved as such from the order of the first appellate authority because your appeal has been allowed on technical grounds and no demand survives. But since revenue has come for appeal before the GST tribunal, you also would want to urge other grounds. If, let us say, revenue succeeds on the technical point, and tomorrow if the tribunal holds that revenue has right in saying that the first appellate authority should not have allowed your appeal on that technical ground, then if you want to argue other grounds which you would have taken before the first appellate authority, but the first appellate authority did not decide those grounds because on the first ground itself your appeal was allowed. In such situation, you will have to file the cross objections. Now, please bear this in mind. that these cross objections are required to be filed within 45 days from the date of communication of revenues appeal. Here we don't have this extended time frame of 30th June. So many of you would be receiving, or clients would have received the messages saying that revenue has filed an appeal against the first appellate orders. In such situation, please bear in mind this window of 45 days and please file those cross objections. The condonable period of further 45 days is available, subject to sufficient cause, but that is the maximum time frame that you have within which the cross objections can be filed, so that you will not lose the right of contesting those matters when they are taken up for hearing on additional grounds which you would have taken before the first appellate authority, or which you desire to take before the tribunal, so as to see that the revenues appeal is dismissed. So that is how the cross objections will have to be understood. Doctrine of precedence and larger bench. See, as far as larger bench is concerned, GST tribunal rules are completely silent on that. Probably they have not visualized how larger bench will get constituted, because each bench, as we saw earlier, has 4 members. A larger bench will require members in odd numbers, 3, 5, etc. Now, because of that difficulty, I believe they have not been able to constitute the larger bench. If they constitute a bench with 3 members, the question arises that which of the technical member, state or center, would be part of that larger bench, and which of the member would get excluded from that larger bench. Probably center and state have not been come to a consensus on those issues. So therefore, that entire subject has not been touched upon by the rules itself. To my mind, this will require an urgent attention of the president of the GSTAT, for the simple reason that in times to come, we will see a lot of conflicting judgments from division benches across India. It might also happen that the same taxpayer might have, on the same issue, might get a judgment from a division bench in state A, and a contradictory judgment from a division bench in state B, in absence of any law saying that the judgment of division bench is binding on the division bench at a subsequent point in time. And therefore, we will see cases which will require a lot of intervention of larger benches, or president order referring those matters to the principal bench. But again, at the principal bench, again, we will have the same scenario. We will have a division bench, again, of the same strength. And therefore, again, the issue will arise is that what happens if the 2 division benches itself collide? In such situation, how do you resolve that? The only remedy is larger bench. But in absence of such provision in the rules, at this point in time, we do not know how the larger bench would get constituted. And therefore, this is something which is going to create a lot of issues if it is not resolved timely. Then we have the provisions of referring to the third member, but it is not like a larger bench. Third member is when 2 members of the division bench itself differ in the opinion. It is in those scenarios that the matter gets referred to a third member, and then the decision of the third member will ultimately prevail. So, but when 2 division benches itself collide, there only larger bench can resolve that collision, and till date we do not see any provisions to that effect in law. Tribunal also has a power of summons and cross-examination, because being a last fact-finding authority, the power is also bestowed to summon persons to take evidence on record by way of cross-examination. Therefore, in cases where you feel that this will require, for the purpose of adjudicating those disputes, you will have to file an interlocutory application for the purpose of seeking issuance of summons, or for the purpose of seeking cross-examinations. Ex parte order, tribunal has to pass what we looked at, section 113. Power has been given to the tribunal to pass the order. They can annul the order, modify the order, or pass the order as they deem fit. But it has to be an order which considers the case record. It cannot be an order simply discarding the appeal on the ground that the authorized representative or the appellant did not participate in the hearing. So this issue is now fairly settled. Consistently, high courts have held that tribunal will have to still pass an order on merits, considering the material which is already available on record. Interlocutory applications we have already seen. National litigation policy, the government has formulated the national litigation policy, where they say that if the amount is not more than 20 lakhs, they will not file an appeal before the tribunal, GST tribunal. Where the amount is not more than 1 crore, they will not file an appeal before the High Court, and where the amount is not more than 2 crores, they will not file an appeal before the Supreme Court. But this policy has a lot of exceptions. So if the government feels that one of the issue involved in this appeal is a substantial question of law, or is a question of law which they feel will have to get decided by the higher forum, then even if the disputed amount involved is below this threshold, still the revenue will have a right to file an appeal against the findings of the first appellate authority before the GST tribunal. So that is how the national litigation policy has been structured. Now the last part, the practical side of this, that how do you prepare yourself for the purpose of gearing up for this opportunity. As I started the discussion by indicating that it is a huge opportunity. The quantum of dispute, the kind of disputes are going to be manifold, not just in terms of volume, but in terms of complexity as well. And therefore, it will require certain essential qualities of the practitioner or a professional who is going to appear before this forum and take the cause of the client before this forum. Now, before I deal with the effective elements of strategy, let me share one important aspect, which I believe is something which all of us as professionals must appreciate. And that is that we should never become a judge, in the sense that we should always keep our mind open. Many times I see that when matters are ultimately taken up, we feel that as a professionals, at times we feel that the matters are very bad. The case of the client is without merit. The client has cannot expect any relief, etc. But let me tell you, on a minor examination of these matters, you will come across certain points, certain issues where probably the client can expect a relief, client can get a benefit from the appeal, etc. So first and foremost, we must understand as a professional that we are paid to represent the client in the best interest of the client. We are not paid for the purpose of representing the revenue or for the purpose of judging as to whether the client's side of the story should win the day or the revenue side of the story should win the day. So first and foremost is this, that we have to always have a very open mind and not to prejudge an issue. Wherever we feel that the revenue has contravened the provisions of the law in terms of not discharging the onus which is required under the law, or not undertaking the proceedings in accordance with the law, etc., we should be clear enough to put that across and to say that these are the grounds on which the demands cannot be survived, and accordingly let the tribunal, let the members ultimately apply their wisdom, their thought process to decide the cases, without taking those causes before the tribunal, without attempting to bring those points before the tribunal. We should never accept or assume that this point may not be worthy, or this dimension or this aspect of the law may not give any relief to the client. So open-mindedness is the most important quality that everyone should develop for the purpose of successfully practicing before this forum. That is first. Second, now when you look at the fundamental process, it is very simple. The law, you have to apply the law to the facts of the case. See, many times I see a lot of professionals probably reading judgments, looking at the summaries, head notes, etc. But that, to my mind, is not the correct way to approach the case. First and foremost are the facts. First, you have to digest the facts of your client's case. Then the law and the application would come. Unless the facts are not clear, unless you have not mastered the facts, unless you have not known the reality, there is the application of law will become futile, because ultimately you will find n number of judgments on n number of issues, but that would not serve the day. First and foremost, you must understand and have a full grip over the facts, which are the material and relevant facts. to this issue, which are the irrelevant facts, which are the facts which your client has been able to prove, which are the facts which your client has not been able to prove. Once you have a grip on those aspects, then you look at the law, how revenue has applied the law to this set of facts. And then you minutely examine the law and see whether those facts really call for the conclusion which the revenue has indicated in their order, or how the first appellate authority has dealt in their order. And that is how the issues are to be identified. And then the drafting has to work. Let me tell you, 90% of the work is reading, thinking. Only 10% is drafting and appearance. Many times we feel that the drafting and the appearance is what is most important in the case. But let me tell you, friends, drafting and appearance comes secondary. If you don't have the case at your fingertips, if you don't know your case thoroughly, if you don't know the law thoroughly, if you don't know what points you are going to canvass before the tribunal, then whatever in whatever fashion you draft your appeal, or in whatever way you present it, it will not take the case any further. So 90% is hard work, 10% is presentation, drafting, preparation, appearance, etc. So, and I have seen in my personal life cases where if you have done the hard work, if you have clearly brought the gaps in the proceeding before the authority, then you will certainly get a relief, even though in the drafting or in the presentation or at the time of personal oral appearance, you may falter in terms of putting across your point precisely, or you falter in terms of presenting your case. So you can work on those aspects, but most important work is developing a case theory. Unless you don't have a concrete case theory with you, there is no point in just working on the draft or the presentation part. So that is second aspect that you must keep in mind. And case theory requires you to have a command, as I said, on the facts and the law. On law, if you are interpreting the law in a particular manner, and then you are saying that the facts in your case does not result into the liability which the revenue has fastened on your client, then you should be able to support your interpretation from the settled legal principles. Because please understand, the legal proceedings work on the concept of legal reasoning. They do not work in vacuum. So every authority, every tribunal member will be looking for a support to the interpretation that you are canvassing before that authority. So you will need to have research to support that. If you are canvassing a certain proposition or a certain way of looking at the legal provision, and then you are saying that it cannot apply to your facts, then you should, as far as the legal propositions are concerned, you should be ready with a proper and an accurate legal research to say that why your way of looking at the law or your reasoning of the legal provisions is a correct view, and therefore you can urge the tribunal to adopt that view, because that is what will make the task of the decision maker, the judge, the members easier. Instead of you expecting that members will do your work, they will do your research and then pass an order in your favor, is something which will not happen. So that is why it is very important. Then third aspect that you should keep in mind, that you will have to ultimately support your legal reasoning with proper case legal precedent. So then once this is ready, once the skeletal is ready, like an architect, once the drawing of the building is ready, then constructing the building is very easy. So similarly, once the entire case is properly broken down into issues, and each issue is then ultimately broken down into the relevant facts and the relevant law on that issue, and how you are justifying that the application of the law to that facts does not result into the liability for the client. Once you have this entire aspect ready in the form of bullet points or in form of a one-page note, then you can start the actual work of drafting. Then drafting becomes very easy, because then you have in your mind the entire structure ready. You will have to just then properly put it in the format in which the procedure requires. So that is why spend good amount of time on researching, reading and analyzing, and coming out with a skeleton of the arguments that you want to put before the in the appeal. and then begin the process of drafting. This will also save a lot of time instead of doing a to and fro where you think something, draft something, then again you think something, then again you draft something. That to and fro will also spoil a lot of energy. It will not give a coherence to your case and will not give a clear picture to the reader as to what is the final point that you are canvassing in those situations. So that is why that is must. Now, as far as once you are ready with the blueprint, then the writing has to be structured. Structured writing in the sense that first, as far as statement of facts are concerned, although facts have to start chronologically, but if you have thought carefully and if you know that certain facts are going to support your cause, once you go to the grounds of appeal and identify those issues and then make an argument in favor of your client, then the statement of facts can also be written in a manner where you don't misquote anything, where you don't suppress anything, where you don't mistreat the facts, but at the same time, you put the facts in a proper perspective. You put the facts in the perspective in which you will then be able to develop your grounds to say that why the decision which you are urging should be given by the tribunal in your favor. So that is statement of fact. Grounds of appeal, each ground has to be numbered. Each ground has to have a heading so that your thought process becomes much cleaner, much clearer. And then each ground has to start with the issue, with the facts, the law, the explanation of that law, and then ultimately synchronize the law with the applicable facts and then end with the conclusion as to why, according to you, by applying this law to your facts, the relief is required to be granted. In the prayer, specifically ask for relief, because many times I see cases where the prayers are also drafted in a very vague manner. So, for example, if you are filing an appeal and you are also attaching an additional evidence, your first prayer should be to permit you to adduce that additional evidence. Then the second prayer would be to decide this issue in your favor. Third prayer would be that you quash the impugned orders and set aside the demands. And fourth prayer would be to pass any order as the honorable tribunal may deem fit in the interest of justice. So that is how the prayer clauses are to be worded. Cross objection will have a different style, because in the cross objection you are ultimately opposing the revenues appeal. So there, instead of making your case, you will have to first say that the revenues appeal on so and so points A, B, C, and D deserves to be dismissed because of so and so reasons. And then you can make your positive case to say that in any case, the appellate authority, the first appellate authority has rightly granted you the the relief, and therefore that order should stand and the revenues appeal should be dismissed. So that is important. As far as oral arguments are concerned, first and foremost, you have to be sure that the forum has the jurisdiction. As I said, certain matters can be taken up only before the principal bench. So you have to be sure of that. If your case involves any of those subject matters like place of supply issue, OIDR issue, ISD issue, etc., then you have to be careful that you cannot then go to a state bench and start making oral arguments, because ultimately after half an hour, the bench will say that, look, we don't have the jurisdiction. You go to principal bench. So that should not happen. Second, know your audience. Now, know your audience would mean the entire environment. See, one is the preparation, but at the same time, after you have thoroughly prepared, you also have to look at the environment in which you are ultimately presenting your case, because each member of the tribunal comes from a different background, has a different prejudices, has certain preconceived ideas, certain preconceived notions. Now, if your case has 10 arguments, now if you, based on your observation, feels that the current members who are going to sit on where in the bench where you are arguing are more comfortable with ground B instead of ground A in your case, and if you feel that by adducing this ground first, you will get the relief for your client, what you are expecting or what your client is expecting, then start with ground B instead of ground A, because you know that these members are already aware of this ground, has taken this ground favorably, and therefore you will expect a better appreciation of those grounds instead of taking grounds which are new or which probably the current members may not be much agreeable to. So therefore, this is what I say, that you should know the environment. You should know what are the inclinations of the members who are sitting on the bench, how they are looking at various grounds. So your observation skill will matter a lot in understanding these aspects, and that is how you will have to structure your arguments, because now in this day and age, nobody has any time to listen to you from ground A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the entire 10 grounds, whatever you have prepared, and then ask you the questions. That in today's day and age, the members will be very impatient, and therefore, unless you don't strike first, members will lose interest, and unnecessarily the case will then get spill over and go into dimensions which probably may not be warranted. So that is why knowing your environment is very important. Knowing your case, extremely important. Knowing your adversary's case, revenue's case, also important. You should also be aware that why revenue is urging at the lower stages that demand should be confirmed, because ultimately the members will ask you that you might have made your positive case, but revenue also will have some argument or some evidence to say that why the relief should not be granted. So you should be ready with the answer to those queries. Either the revenue's argument could be irrelevant to the law which has been invoked, or the revenue might have wrongly interpreted the law, or the revenue would not have considered material evidence and would have instead relied on an irrelevant evidence, etc. But that answer should be there available with you, so that when the bench asks you those queries, you are ready to answer those queries. You should be very accurate because, as I indicated earlier, this day and age, nobody has any patience to listen to long sessions. So you have to be extremely accurate, and this comes from a clarity in thinking. If you are more clear in your thinking, the accuracy and the preciseness will automatically come. You should always lead with the strongest argument. If you are arguing first, you have to make a positive case. Then you have to also refute the revenues case, and then ultimately end by saying that what is the relief that you are claiming from this tribunal. Always occupy the most defensible terrain. So this is basically a very, very important aspect to understand. That see, in every matter, you will find 10 issues or 10 gaps, 10 infractions. Now, you have to understand that if ultimately what the client desires is a relief, what the client desires is that he wants to ultimately get a relief from the demands which are there against that client. So instead of taking a broader issue and expecting a broader judgment, will require a lot of arguments, a lot of counter arguments will come from the revenue, and the tribunal members may not be comfortable in deciding a larger question. But if with a narrower question pertaining to your set of facts, if you can also get a relief, and that relief will satisfy the requirement of the client, then you should aim for that narrower relief, which will grant you the same effectively the relief which you would have granted had you addressed the larger problem. Because larger problem will require a lot of policy arguments, a lot of policy decision making, and therefore to that extent you will face a lot of resistance in terms of getting the case decided in your favor. So that is important. Then you have to always communicate clearly, concisely. You have to, this is very important. You should always start with the main issue first. See, normally what I see is that when the matter is called out, you straight away say, this is wrong, that is wrong, this is not right, this is not right. But then tribunal members would not have read your appeal in the manner in which you would have read your appeal. You would have spent days and days in preparation of your appeal. You would have read from morning that appeal 5 times before it is called out for hearing. But the tribunal members would not have done that same. So they would not be conversant with your case the way you are conversant with your case. So therefore, you will have to first create a base. You have to first indicate the main issue on which you are going to put your arguments, and then take the members to those issues, so that way they will be able to appreciate and better understand exactly how you are putting your points forward. Then appeal not just to the rules, but to justice and common sense. Again, very important, because rules are there, law is there. At the same time, since all the decisions in the context of GST are taken by the businessmen, under some circumstances, under some situations, so bring that out, put that point also across as to why those actions were taken. So that will also bring that additional element of justice and common sense in the picture, so as to make your case looked at favorably. then don't appeal to emotions. See, ultimately, whatever wrong the revenue would have done, that will come out clearly if you, with reasoning, bring out those points across to the tribunal. You cannot just keep on saying that the revenue has done so wrong, they have harassed me, etc., etc. Revenue might have done that, but the way of putting that point is not to say directly to the bench that this is how emotionally I have been tortured, etc. You show them through documents. You show them how the show cause notice was framed, how your reply was not considered, how the first appellate authority dealt with your appeal, how the findings are not reasoned, how the findings are not considering the evidence which is already on record, how the findings are completely illogical. You demonstrate that. Once the benches see that in the case record, they will be with you. They will also understand exactly what as you have undergone, and that is how you will be able to effectively put your point across rather than just making an overt appeal on emotions. So always maintain a posture of a respectful intellectual equality. Ultimately, that is what will come down to, that you focus on reasons, you focus on evidence, you focus on the records which are there in your case. That will send the message across very swiftly, as opposed to reiterating the manner in which emotionally the client would have undergone the proceedings. And then at the end, you have to close very powerfully. You have to say to the tribunal that exactly what is the relief you are seeking. And you have to summarize it, that which are those 2, 3, 4 key grounds on which the relief what you are seeking deserves to be granted in your case, so that the tribunal members will also, at the end of the day, also through a summary, will be able to note it down, that these are the key oral arguments that you have made, and this is the relief that you have sought, so that when they ultimately sit for drafting the order for the purpose of pronouncement, etc., they will be able to at least link your text of the appeal and the synopsis and the submissions, etc., with how you presented the case at the time of oral hearing. So I think with this, I wish all of you best of luck. All of us are students. All of us will keep on learning. And GST Tribunal is a huge opportunity. So I will urge all the professionals who have joined today to equip themselves to start representing the clients before this forum when the effective hearing starts. And with better experience, better wisdom would come. And that will surely benefit not only the professional in question, but the country at large. Because as you know, the GST, the disputes, the quantum is so huge that it requires good professionals representing the cases before this forum, so that we can see the resolution of those issues, which can effectively reduce litigation and take this country forward. So with this, I again thank the ICAI, the GST Indirect Tax Committee, for allowing me to share some of my thoughts on the topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Radhika
Hello?
ma'am.
Yes, sir. Hello. So we have few questions with us. Moving
Okay.
on to the question number 1. This question has 3 parts to it, sir. How do you want me to proceed, sir? May I quote you all the questions together, the subparts of it, or you want me to take parts by parts of it?
No, you can, whatever you are comfortable. Or you can
Okay.
share your screen. I will just quickly read the questions and I can answer it if that can save
Okay.
time.
Cool.
Okay. By filing, right. So I'm just sequentially going. First question is.
Sir, you are reading the question, but the participants are apart from the one who has raised the question, and which
Okay.
question is will be discussed. So I'll have to also state the question. So meanwhile, you read it parallelly, and I'll say it for all the
Okay,
participants.
fine.
Yes. The first question is, while filing ITC dispute appeal before GSTAT, while choosing case summary, the drop-down does not have this classification. how to proceed and which option to be selected. Second
Right.
subpart, please clarify in case of appellant having state GST as proper officer, an issue raised by central GST audit, and first appellate authority order is passed by central.
Right. So see, as far as the first question is concerned, as I understand that on the portal, there are a lot of challenges. So if you are not able to identify the subject for which you are filing the appeal, then as I understand, there is a residual category also, which is there on the portal. So you can select that and that is the others category. And basis that you will be able to file the appeal. As far as the second query is concerned, as long as the first appellate authority, see, at the tribunal stage, we don't have a state tribunal bench and a central tribunal bench. It is a uniform bench for the whole entire state. So, irrespective of whether the first appellate authority is a central authority or a state authority, the appeal will go only before the concerned state bench, who has the territorial jurisdiction. So, that bench will be taking up the appeal. So, probably that is how I think that was the query, that which bench will take up the query. But since we have only one bench for each of the jurisdiction, that only that bench will be able to take up those second appeals.
From the same participant, the third part of the query is, for an appellant registered in Tamil Nadu state, who should be named as respondents in case of state GST and central GST authorities?
So see here, respondents would be the adjudicating authority against which, because you are ultimately, see, I'll just briefly explain how technically it happens, that there is a demand order. You carried that order before the first appellate authority. First appellate authority dismissed that appeal on merits. So the demand order gets merges with the appellate order. Now you want to carry that order before the tribunal. So your respondent would be the adjudicating authority who has passed the demand order against you. So if the state has passed the order, then that concerned state authority, whose name and designation you will see in the order in original, that would be the respondents. If the central has passed the authority, they would be because of cross empowerment, either state would have passed the order or central would have passed the order, raising demands of state, center, both. So basis the authority who has passed the order, that would be the respondent.
Moving on to the next question. This question is from Sikandrabad. Question says, those appeals which are to be filed but delayed beyond statutory period, will it be admitted by GSTAT?
So as I said, if the appeals are filed beyond the normal period, then you still have additional 3 months condonable period. So, but that has to be supported by a delay condonation application, bringing out the sufficient cause which prevented you from filing the appeal within the normal period of limitation. If that is the case, then it will certainly be admitted, it will be heard, and then the tribunal will decide whether the sufficient cause was justified enough for admitting that, for ultimately hearing that appeal on merit. So that is how it will work. So it will not be summarily rejected merely because it is delayed. Because ultimately, see, many times it happens that the portal picks up the date which is there in the online form APL04, but you might have received the communication of the first appeal order late. So according to you, your date of communication could be much after the date of the order. Now, in your appeal memo, you would have indicated those aspects, that effectively your date of communication was so and so, and this appeal is within the 3 months period from so and so. So therefore, all these matters will require the tribunal to first hear you, appreciate what you are canvassing, and look at the evidence which you are relying upon, and then decide. So it will never be summarily rejected merely because online the date from the date it appears that it is belated appeal.
Okay. Next question is from Surat. At the time of filing appeal, in the attachment tab, they are asking to submit appeal and affidavits. Whether the appeal form APL05 has to be prepared manually and submit the same in appeal. Also, what affidavits has to be filed with appeal form.
Right. So see, as far as the forms are concerned, they are all available on the portal. So APL05, there is no manual that you have to prepare it manually and then scan it and get it submitted. The APL05, that itself is the appeal form which is on the portal. You fill it up and you file it. So there is no separate attachment that is required. As far as affidavits are concerned, that depends on the case. So in a certain situation where, let us say, you are relying upon certain affidavits in support of demonstrating certain factual aspects, there those affidavits will have to be uploaded. If your case does not require those affidavits, then those affidavits need not be uploaded.
Whether the order which are required to be uploaded are to be compulsorily signed by the authorized representative. Also, each and every document relied upon by the appellant, whether they all have to be signed by AR.
Right. So see, as far as the statutory notice and orders are concerned, as I indicated in my presentation, that if they are available on the portal itself, then the rule says they need not be signed. Right. So if let us say on the portal, if the show cause notice was uploaded, order in original was there, appeal order is there, then the downloaded copy from that portal itself is suffice and you can upload that along with the appeal. However, if on the portal, if those documents are not there, then there is a requirement of a certified copy, which you will have to get it certified from the gazetted officer or the GST officer, and those documents will have to be uploaded. That last page where you will find the signature and stamp, that you can attach along with the scanned copy of those documents. Now, as far as relied upon documents are concerned, see, in appeal, please understand the concept is not that you separately file relied upon documents. So while drafting your appeal statement of facts, you will be referring to a lot of documents to support your chronology. In the grounds, probably, see, ideally, the style of drafting has to be that the statement of facts has to have reference to all the documents which you will require for the purpose of canvassing your case, including the statutory documents such as the show cause notice order, appeal order, etc. The grounds of appeal are the legal arguments. So as far as the grounds of appeal are concerned, there you will not be bringing additional fact in picture while drafting the grounds of appeal. Grounds of appeal will require a support by only by way of case laws or precedents which you want to rely upon to canvass your legal argument. So that is the distinction. So whatever you upload will have a reference to statement of facts or grounds of appeal, and those are already signed. Because ultimately the statement of facts, grounds of appeal, and the prayer, all the three will have to be signed, and only then it would be filed. So once those are there, then a separate signature on all those addendums will not be required, because those are already part of the original case record. So no separate signature will be required on each and every document which is attached with the appeal paper.
Next question is from Bilaspur. In regards to section 108, they seek to ask if only department prejudicial order are considered under section 108.
See, that issue right now is pending before several high courts. My personal view is that section 108 is basically in the nature of a supervisory power. And the language, to my mind, clearly suggests that only situations which are prejudicial to the interest of revenue, only those matters can be taken up for revision. A matter which is not prejudicial to the revenue but prejudicial to the assessee, that cannot be taken up for revision under section 108. So, to my mind, 108 power would not be available to pass an order in favor of the taxpayer. It would always be exercised against the taxpayer when the higher authority finds that the lower authority has passed an order which is prejudicial to the revenue. So that is how I will look at the provisions of 108.
Okay. Next question is from Surat. Question is in form of a sample example about pre-deposit amount at both appellant authority and before GSTAT. If, for example, before first appellate authority, the disputed amount is 1 lakh, and undisputed amount was 25,000. Thereafter, relief was granted by first appellant authority for 50,000. So the undisputed amount still remains the same, and the disputed amount is reduced to 50,000. They seek to ask what will be the pre-deposit amount at both first appellate authority and before GSTAT.
Right. So see, as far as the first appellate authority is concerned, you will have to pay the entire undisputed amount, that is 25,000, along with whatever interest, penalty, whatever has been imposed. And as far as the disputed amount is concerned, 1 lakh, you will have to pay 10% of that. So 10,000. Now, if let us say first appellate authority has given a relief that out of the disputed amount of 1 lakh, 50,000 demands have been set aside, 50,000 have been confirmed. So now in the second stage at the GSTAT, you will have to pay 10% of 50,000, that is 5,000 as a pre-deposit.
Next question is from Jodhpur. Can time-barred case rejected by the first appellant authority be entertained by GSTAT on merit basis?
See, this will not be possible. As I explained earlier, the doctrine of merger applies. So, but that applies only if first appellate authority has given a finding on merits. So, if let us say your first appeal was rejected on limitation, then tribunal will not be able to travel beyond that and say that on merits the demands under the original order are incorrect. However, if let us say the first appellate authority has wrongly rejected your appeal on limitation, if you are making a case to say that the service of the order on the portal was not an effective service, and therefore you are making a case that only when you received the recovery notice, it is at that point in time that you came to know about the order, and that is the date of communication, and within 3 months from that date you had filed the first appeal, yet first appellate authority rejected the appeal by considering the issue date of order as the date of communication. So those matters can be taken before the GSTAT. So as far as the findings which are recorded in the first appellate authority, you can take those matters before the GSTAT. But if let us say undisputedly you are also agreeing that the date of communication and the filing of appeal before the first appellate authority was beyond the condonable period, then the tribunal will not be able to look at the merits of the case. Then the only remedy, as I indicated, would be to exercise the writ remedy, where under Article 226 you will have to make a case before the jurisdictional high court.
Okay. Next question is from Ghaziabad. The filing fees on GSTAT portal is charging fees of 1,000 rupees for lack of disputed tax interest, whereas Rule 110 Sub Rule 5 does not state the same. So what's your opinion on?
No, it states basically, if you see the chart that you saw in the presentation, it is formulated based on the provisions of the law and the rules itself. So this is the statutory fee which has been indicated.
Okay. Next question is a good question from Chennai. Appellant has paid the demand, but he has different view on the same. The order was passed recording his dissent. Can he file the appeal against the order?
Certainly, that right of appeal does not get extinguished merely because at that point of time you made some payment under protest. The right of appeal under law still survives because it is you who have to decide whether you are aggrieved with that order. And therefore, as long as you are aggrieved and you are filing an appeal, the appeal cannot be dismissed merely because you paid some amount during investigation, etc. So that right still survives. So you can very well file an appeal, and as and when you succeed, you will be entitled to the refund of whatever amount that was paid.
Another question from Ghaziabad. If one filed the appeal without translation of order,
Right.
can translated order be filed with registry on later
Right. So
date?
this will be a defective appeal. So what, to my mind, you will be receiving a defect memo as and when they will verify all these appeals which are getting filed online. And as and when you receive the defect memo, they will give you a time period, probably from 15 days to 30 days, what was there in the SysTAT regime. And within that time, if you will be given the liberty to rectify those defects. As I said earlier, see, there will never be a situation where for such procedural irregularities, your substantive right of appeal will get defeated. Already there are settled judgments on this proposition. So your appeal right will never get frustrated because of this technical limitations. But of course, when you receive the defect notice, you will have to act on that and get your defects rectified. Once rectified, the appeal will be taken up for hearing.
Uh, from Mumbai, whether GSTAT can interpret that mere uploading of order on portal cannot constitute date of communication under Section 107 for filing appeal.
Yes, sir. In fact, this question is currently pending before the Honorable Supreme Court. If you see Allahabad High Court in the case of Bambino Products has already held that the uploading of an order is merely a fact of uploading, as the name itself suggests. It is not a date of communication. So the revenue is ultimately confusing itself by saying that the date of upload is the date of communication. So therefore, the Allahabad High Court holds that division bench has taken a view that a date of uploading can never be treated as a date of communication. Now, revenue has filed an SLP before the Supreme Court against that order. So already the matter is pending before the Supreme Court. In fact, Madras High Court, a lot of other high courts have also taken a view that the upload on the portal will not be an effective communication, especially in situations where, let us say, the registrations of the taxpayers have been cancelled much prior to the initiation of proceedings, or let us say where earlier show cause notice was also uploaded on the portal, but it was not responded. That itself indicates that that was not an effective upload. So therefore, very well, the GSTAT, if let us say by that point in time, if we don't have an authoritative ruling on this issue, GSTAT can very well interpret the provisions of law and say as to whether in your set of facts, what would be the date of communication.
Another question from Andhra Pradesh. Notice is received from State GST Office demanding CGST and SGST. Participant seeks to file appeal and wish to understand which amount to be considered to discharge filing fees.
So filing fees, you don't have to bother much because portal itself will calculate it for you. The moment you put the disputed tax amount, as I indicated earlier, every 2,000 rupees, 1,000 each for every 1 lakh of disputed tax amount is how the filing fee would get calculated. So accordingly, you will have to deposit that filing fee, statutory filing fee, subject to maximum of 25,000.
Participants are desirous to hear provisions about cross appeal once again, sir, and your understanding around.
See, as I indicated, cross appeal is where there is a first appeal order partly in your favor, partly against you. So therefore, you will be aggrieved against your part, revenue might be aggrieved against their part. If both of you file an appeal, then that situation is considered as a cross appeal. Cross objection is different. Cross objection is where the order is in your, let us say, the first appellate authority holds the order in your favor by saying that Section 74 could not have been invoked, and therefore the entire demand is not sustainable. There are certain contentions you would have taken on merits, but the first appellate authority would not have dealt with those contentions. Now, revenue goes to appeal before GSTAT by saying that the first appellate authority has committed an error by holding that in that set of facts 74 is not applicable, or the allegation of fraud is not applicable. In such situation, you will be filing cross objection to say, first, to defend the order of the first appellate authority, to say that he has rightly held that 74 is not invocable, and additionally you will also say that on merits also the demands are not sustainable. So tomorrow before GSTAT, if the revenue succeeds on the technical point of invocation of 74, then you will also have the liberty to contest other grounds so as to ultimately ensure that the revenue's appeal does not succeed. So that is the situation of a cross objection.
Okay. Another question from Hyderabad. There is a 1-year delay while responding to notice. Condonation was not allowed by department. Can any relief be sought for condoning the delay and the process the demand order based on actual facts?
See, there, as I explained earlier, as far as the condonation part is concerned, after the Supreme Court judgments, now the law is fairly settled that tribunal or the first appellate authority does not have an unlimited power to condone the delay. They have to ultimately function within the contours of the law. So if you have not been able to file the appeal within even the extended period, and therefore first appeal has been dismissed, then the tribunal also will not be able to get into the merits of the demand and decide that case. So ultimately, you will have to come up from the limitation first. So either, so for example, up to 2023, when similar matters were there, the GST Council had come out with a scheme where they say that all those delayed matters will ultimately be heard on merits, provided the taxpayers pay additional pre-deposit of 2.5%, and accordingly some remedy was created. Similarly, in future, if similar scheme comes, then that remedy would be available. Or alternately, Article 226, as we discussed, that remedy is available. But if the first appellate authority has dismissed the appeal because on the ground of limitation, and on that, if you don't have any quarrel, tribunal will not be able to grant you relief on merits.
Another question from Mumbai. RCM demand would not require going to principal bench unless the demand is based on determination of place of supply. Is that correct? Second, can a matter of RCM demand for services received from non-resident service provider go to principal bench on the ground that ultimately that would also need determination of place of supply?
No, so see, basically a place of supply is a specific issue. So for example, if let us say we are taking a case of an intermediary services. Now, prior to the amendment which have now come, intermediary services, the place of supply was the location of the supplier. So in a situation where let us say you are having a quarrel with that issue as to whether you satisfy, whether you are an intermediary or not. Now, that issue is an issue of interpreting the contract and then coming to a conclusion as to whether you satisfy the test of intermediary or not. Once that test is satisfied, the law is very clear that the place of supply would be the location of the intermediary. So those matters will not go to the principal bench. Those matters will remain with the state benches. A place of supply issue will be like this, that for example, under section 10, if let us say in the context of goods, we have the provision which says that in a situation where on the direction of the third person, you direct the supplier to supply the goods to someone else, then the law deems that third person to be the recipient and the location of that person as the place of supply. At the same time, we also have under the same provision certain other provisions which says that in a situation where the supply is through an e-commerce platform, then the place of supply would be the location where the goods are physically sent. So there is a conflict between these two provisions. So in a situation where your case involves that conflict, this is a question of place of supply. So this will go to the principal bench.
Next question from Chennai. Is there option to present the case based on the written representation instead of presenting the case personally?
Certainly. So see, ultimately in the tribunal also, you can always say that you are tendering written submissions and you can ask the bench to take that written submissions into consideration. But it is not an effective strategy because ultimately, see, the benches expect that the professional or person who is representing will brief the bench about the issues, take them through the relevant documents, the relevant case records, etc., so that they familiarize themselves with the case record, with the documents, etc., which helps them in passing the judgment. So it is from that context that it is always better to represent the case rather than just making written submission. But you are right that if you only want to give written submissions, that is perfectly available in the written submissions. You will have to state at the end that you are waiving the right for personal hearing, and you will request the bench to consider the written submissions while passing the order. So that would suffice.
Okay. Next question from Surat. It's in respect of appeal fees payment, discharging on the portal. They selected the state of Gujarat, but the challan shows that it has been paid to Delhi ITAT bench.
No, see, that cannot be. ITAT is Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. I don't know GST, this thing portal will have any linkage with payment to the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. If that is the case, then it's a big technical glitch. I think immediately you should point out to the GST authority and the tribunal that the payments are getting transferred to ITAT bench. But I don't think that is happening. The payments are going before the GSTAT only.
Next question is from Kolkata. In case of AR, authorized representative for corporate bodies, is it mandatory to have board resolution to authorize a person or a power of attorney sufficient? Because holding a board meeting is difficult.
So see, that ultimately depends. Like for example, if you're authorizing a chartered accountant to appear, then that authority has to flow from the board. It is possible that board might have given a general authority to a taxation head or a taxation manager or a taxation in charge. Qua that authority, that in charge can authorize the chartered accountant to appear in that matter. So accordingly, in that authority letter, that person will indicate that by resolution so and so dated so and so, he is authorized to appoint any person to handle so and so subject matters. According and exercising that authority, he is appointing so and so chartered accountant, practicing chartered accountant as an authorized representative in appeal number so and so. So that is how the authority letter will be drafted and that will be submitted. I think that should serve the purpose.
Okay. And the last question from Surat. If taxpayer failed to file APT-01 within due date and bank account is freezed, then what are the remedies available to the taxpayer?
So this is again that same issue. In fact, day in, day out, we face this issue that people miss the bus in filing the appeals within the statutory timelines, and then ultimately we are looking at the remedy. Unfortunately, the only remedy right now is that you will have to ultimately go to the writ court under Article 226 or wait for some scheme, the way the scheme came in 2023 for such belated appeals. If the GST Council recognizes this issue on a pan-India basis and comes out with a amnesty kind of scheme, subject to whatever conditions that they feel appropriate, that can sort out these issues, or the writ remedy is something which is available. But again, writ courts also you will have to be careful, because ultimately there also you will have to face this question of delay, and you will need a good answer as to why you could not prefer an appeal within the statutory time frame.
Okay. More than a question, it's an appeal from a very senior chartered accountant from Chennai. They are appealing to the committee to take up the issue of difficulties faced in e-filing portal, as well as there is a possibility of scope of extending the time period to 31st December this year for filing appeals. So your lookout on it.
No, I agree completely. In fact, right now, filing appeal itself is a huge task, as I also explained. Not only just because of the portal glitches, because of the incorrect manner in which the lower authorities have issued the summary orders, the summary appeal orders, the kind of data which the APL 5 form is seeking again is humongous. And as against that, if you see the first appeal process, if you even compare this with the income tax appellate tribunal filing, they are so simple and smooth. And this is a forum which has to have that as a principal objective of making the of allowing the taxpayers, aggrieved taxpayers, to approach these forums in a less cumbersome way, in a simplified way. Because that is the whole idea of creating this tribunal. So I completely second this thought process that they will have to seriously look at this, and they will have to do it at the earliest, because now the due date is fast approaching. And at the nth hour, they cannot then rectify the portal and then expect all of us to rush through and file all the pending appeals in a shorter time frame. So time and again, all of us have been saying this. So we are only hoping that the GSTAT acts on this proposal. I completely second what the learned senior CA has indicated.
So with this, we have come to an end to all the questionnaires submitted by the participants. We are glad to share with you that the registered quantum of count of members who have participated in this webinar has crossed 1,000. We are especially on behalf of all the participants and IDT and GST committee of ICAI. We are especially grateful to Abhay sir for sharing your deep practical experience with clarity on GSTAT, for having truly added immense value. We hope today's curation of IDT committee shall boost your skill set of the participants, and give everyone an upper edge in practice. Stay tuned for upcoming topics in pipeline in its commitment of weekly webinars at your fingertips. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining. Wishing you all a relaxing evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please. I was trying to do the same.
Recording stopped.